So thank you to Maria Papaioannou. Now it's time to introduce myself, reveal myself. I'm Sofia Handaka. I'm the curator of world cultures at the Benaki Museum, also the host and the co-founder of the CoMuseum, so I'm going to wear my MC hat now. Welcome everybody, welcome our online friends to the third day of the CoMuseum 2024, which is on museums and trust. I was going to pass the spirit of what has been discussed so far, the zest of the matter, but I'm very impressed to say that the US Consul said exactly the key words that we have been discussing within the theater, but also in private discussions with all our speakers. And building trust is a long-term process that requires being realistic, being patient, being truthful to oneself and to others, and being transparent. And I'm very happy to see that these principles, because it's a matter of principles and values, can be passed through even discussions about what's the role of museums within a society that is really difficult to deal with right now around the world. So that being said, I'm happy to say that discussions today will continue on that spirit, on how one builds relationships with communities, meaningful relationships. Also, how cultural institutions are responsible to become as inclusive and as accessible as they can be to all types of diversities that exist in the world. And with no further ado, I would like to introduce our first panel, call on Prodromos Monastiridis, who's the moderator and one of our hosts. Mikis? There you are. Thank you. So Mikis is the marketing director of the Thessaloniki Concert Hall, which again I want to thank for hosting the CoMuseum, and happy to have Liam Browne and Seán Doran, from co-creators and producers of the ULYSSES European Odyssey from Ireland. And Maria Papasotiri, the head of the Thessaloniki Cinema Museum, our local partner, who will discuss about embedding diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility principles in festivals. So please, Mikey, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Sophia. Welcome everybody on the concert hall on my, let's say, double ID here, both as marketing director and as a moderator. It is a truly pleasure to discuss with these distinguished panel members the topic, but as we were discussing at the beginning, before we start here the official ceremony, the title of the panel is so emphatic, so huge, with so many parameters to discuss, which is actually could be a whole museum conference by itself. So many things we have to do as cultural organizations these days, and getting more and more demands from the society and from all group members of art culture every day. So the thing we discussed at the beginning is it, first of all, is it too much the thing we demand and we expect from cultural organizations? Is it more than art these days? Is it too expensive? Or first of all, is it too demanding to meet all these parameters for being a cultural manager or cultural artistic director, whatever? And shall we start with Maria, first of all, as the only lady of the panel?
Καλησπέρα σας. Αρχικά θα ήθελα...
Good afternoon. I would first of all like to thank the organizing committee for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I believe that what we are asking from cultural organizations are not too much, but on the contrary, should be considered a challenge. Embedding the principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility is our duty, after all. What we need to do is to find the right resources to train and educate ourselves accordingly, to change our mentality, and why not also the mentality of our communities, in order to be able to build these solid bridges of trust with our audience. In this way, we can ensure that cultural bodies will have a long-term sustainability after all.
Again, the magic word is resources, money, and it's all about money, even if we discuss of art. Before we hear the opinion for this thing from Seán and Liam, I would like to ask, because it's really challenging, how a Greek mythological character like Ulysses found his place in Ireland. We all thought that his safe harbor was close to Ithaca. What about Ireland? What he's doing there? Just as a few words about his activities there.
With Joyce, yes. Well, it's an extraordinary book, epic novel, as we know. But Joyce was actually in Italy when he started 1914 to write, and then Zurich and Paris, so he was on the European continent. I mean, in Ireland, yes, he could have picked an ancient set of tales called the Ulster Cycle, or the Toyn Bog Cúlinge, which is actually the oldest vernacular epic in Europe. But at that time, you had Yeats and others who were doing the Celtic revival, and Joyce didn't want to take part in that. He was much more an internationalist. So he chose Ulysses. He didn't learn or ancient Greek. He did at the very end of his life, but that's what drew him to that tale that he felt was flexible, inspiring enough, the Homer's Odyssey, to come up with a contemporary 20th century that the hero was an ordinary man, and it's all the actions and what happens within one day.
So there is a Greek everywhere. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely, everything's Greek, and the opening episode of it is "Let's go to Athens." The three students are on the Martello Tower, and they're shouting out into the Irish Sea, "Let's Hellenize Ireland, let's go to Athens."
Okay, good to hear that. Yes, please.
It's also worth saying that, so we had this novel, we were celebrating 100 years since its publication, but how do you make it relevant? How do you make it contemporary? Which ties into some of the themes that we're talking about. And what we wanted to do was, well, we believed that in each of the 18 episodes of the novel, there was a contemporary theme that was relevant to Europe today, and that's what the various cities in the project were going to explore. And we found, gender freedom, migration, mental well-being, urban renewal, all those themes that matter to us today are in Joyce and are in Ulysses.
So, Liam, since you got a microphone, do you think that diversity is more advanced or more easy to achieve in Western countries like Ireland compared to Greece's situation, or let's say the Balkan countries? Are you in a more advanced situation regarding to our issues we're discussing here?
Well, it's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I went to a festival of celebrating Irish writing. It was at the British Library in London. And one of the events there was a celebration of diversity in Irish writing, talking about migrant writers who have come and lived in Ireland. Now, the touchstones in terms of other writers for them are not Joyce or W.B. Yeats or anything like that. They have their own writers that have inspired them, and they bring the love of those writers into Ireland. And what they were talking about was trying to weave new narratives into the Irish literary landscape, their narratives, which enriches Ireland. And there is certainly now a new energy in the country, and it's an energy coming from migrant artists. But what's also interesting is they said that the part of those narratives is about writing things that are challenging. So, for example, they might write about racism in Ireland. They might write about the suppression of minority voices. But that feeds into the culture, it feeds into dialogue, it creates responses from audiences, good or ill. And I think that's very, very positive. We need those energies now. And I think certainly it's happening in Ireland.
On the title, there is a magic word like festival. Do you think that there is a certain type of organization, like a festival, is more flexible to achieve these targets, or a museum, or a a concert hall, is it a job structure or organizational structure that easier to achieve all the things we're discussing here? Maria?
Νομίζω ότι τα φεστιβάλ, ναι, είναι πιο ευέλικτα.
I think that festivals, yes, are more flexible. They're organizations that have created the appropriate meetings and networks, and they can have diverse content. So they can include a larger audience and create a more inclusive society. Therefore, from my experience at the Thessaloniki Film Festival, even from how the review juries are composed, we see that we have a diversity. The content of the films also represent many different and diverse approaches from artists. And we try to gain the trust of the audience.
Foot, they're chameleon-like, they can be so flexible. I think a number one responsibility if you're a festival director, as we are, an international multi-arts festival, is that if it's for 3 weeks, it's not the 3 weeks of the year that you have to present and curate. That's not too hard. It's the impact you make on the other 49 weeks before you come back again the following year, how you've altered and changed the scene. So you have to take risks going into virgin territory where there's weaknesses within the culture or minuses, to address those particularly and take those risks you can as a 3-week festival. I mean, the diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, it can be said, yes, when they're placed beside each other, those words, as if they're a weight on your shoulder. I agree with Maria. We have individually within the arts just naturally a responsibility. They are now the big buzzwords, no question about that, and they should be attainable and to be reached. But what we've found is that when you address them with authenticity, they lead you to places in an artistic way that you may not otherwise have because you haven't shared those values, let's say, from your own background necessarily. So they open up new pastures of creation and creativity. Now, the negative side of it, I think, unquestionably, is that they have become the buzzwords from government and funding authorities where, like anyone, you're putting applications together and you're assessed and, you get so much many marks out of wherever you address it. So it's pulling the artistic organisations in a way to address them quite rightly, but you also have to question to make sure all of us are not losing what's the most important single thing, which is the artist. It's not for the artist's responsibility to address those necessarily, it's for us as the arts curators.
Interesting approach as well. Liam, how easy is for a cultural organization, for your organization, to make this management of change in the society they operate? I mean, to persuade people about diversity, about inclusivity, all these things, and how much you insist and how much patience you need to have to achieve your goals, your tasks. And do you find, because you're operating in more than one markets, how easy to manage this cultural change between, for example, Italy and Ireland or whatever?
I think, and this is sort of picking up what the other speakers are talking about, you have to be open to learning yourself, first of all, and not assume that you have the knowledge in terms of curating or programming, particularly in areas, for example, of diversity. Seán and I are two white men of a certain age, and you have to be conscious that there is a lot you don't know. And you need to hear other voices, you need to have other people coming into that dialogue, and you have to be open to being educated yourself. I'm also conscious, we're talking about museums, we're talking about arts, we're talking about the centrality of arts in our lives, but the reality is there are a lot of people for whom the arts aren't central. And if you are working 2 jobs or you're a single parent, it may not, well, it almost certainly won't be able to matter because you won't have the time. And there are other urgencies then in your life. So that begs the question, if you want to involve more people, how do you do it? One of the things that was very interesting in this Ulysses European Odyssey programme that we did, the one thing we said to each of the partners they had to do was when their public event had to engage with a public space. Other than that, they had complete artistic autonomy. And they were very imaginative in the way that they did that. And one that comes to mind is one of our city partners was Cluj-Napoca in Romania. And there used to be a building in the city called Clujana, which was a shoe factory, made shoes for all across Europe. And there was huge effects. It was an iconic building in the city, but it closed down. And our partners worked really, really hard to get access to that building. It was lying derelict. And eventually they did. They moved in. It had been left. There was like files and offices. It was all as if, you know, the workers had just gone. And they created an immersive theatrical experience in there. But what also happened is people came in off the street because they saw the door was open and they wanted to go back because that building is full of memories. And where you do something, the places you choose, first of all, you can provoke memories in an extraordinary way, which brings a resonance to the event that you're doing. But it also makes people more comfortable. It's somewhere they know they step into with ease. And that can be transformative in terms of how you're trying to engage with the wider community.
Do we need help from experts, or artists can do everything, even in this field? Are we ready to seek any help from experts outside the artistic field? Can we afford them?
I will talk about our festival, where we have a general director and an artistic director. The artistic director is responsible for the cultural product, creativity, innovation in cooperation with artists. And the general director deals with the practical things. She actually maps out the strategy, which will include the values that we're talking about today. And at the same time, she will try to save on sources. So for me, a key is the combination of the two.
I mean, I'd like to just move on from the theory and I'm trying to pick an example. And I did run a venue once. It was the London Coliseum when I was artistic director of the English National Opera. And when you arrive at an opera house, your predecessor has set a program 3 years ahead of you. So how do you, bring about altering the direction as you would wish for it in sooner time? But it was more than that my predecessor had put, and I'm using this as an example of a building and how you might innovatively, I think it's down to innovation in programming that can sort of leapfrog the difficulty to create the diversity, inclusiveness and accessibility. And we were doing The Ring by Wagner, the 4 operas, 15 hours long within the building. But I remember reading when Wagner was writing in the 1840s, stopped composing, and he wrote about that he wanted to change opera away from the bourgeoisie and for it to be performed outdoor, these are his words, free to an audience in a festival environment. And immediately that's what hit upon us, that this is Glastonbury. So what we did was we took the 3rd act of the Valkyrie, which was 1 hour, and we took it to the Glastonbury Festival where 50,000 people heard that Wagner. I would go further to say that we knew we were starting with the first 12 minutes of the Valkyrie, which is the Rite of the Valkyries, from people would know from the Apocalypse Now or whatever. It was the remaining 50 minutes, which was the intimate duet between Wotan and Brunhilde, the father and daughter. I genuinely didn't know how might that go in the field, 50,000 people. And the big screens were up on the pyramid stage, the 100-piece orchestra and the 9 singers. And after the 9 minutes, it just quietened down, and you started seeing faces with tears running down their faces right through to the end. It was a great example of trust your audience. Now, in the financials which you're emphasising, Mac, we couldn't have afforded to do that. There was no money in our budget to do that. But it was an example of a programme leading the budget, as always, rather than getting stuck in the budget leading the programme. And we went out, and very immediately, in a 40-minute meeting, we raised $250,000 just with the particular telephone company. It was O2, in fact, who loved the sense of the idea. And they paid for our orchestra. We had to pay for our own orchestra because musician union rules, you're performing outside of the building. But it's an example of how you can use an idea or innovation to find your way out from your core programme if you're running a venue or a building.
Liam, since we're talking about art and a more proper politically framework, let's say, about all these things, how you handle a situation when you, let's say, expect something from an artist that doesn't meet all these criteria we meet? You try to change, you say it's art, I mean, we accept it and people say whatever they think. And even more, what's your opinion about a trend or a popular movement about changing famous artistic things like even films or books that they are not in the framework we're discussing now? For example, let's say about the movie Gone with the Wind, that everybody's saying that even the film company that they will take out some parts because, you know, they're referring to Negroes and all the things that happen in the States at this time.
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the relationship with the artist, that you are placing trust in the artist by inviting him or her in the first place. You made a decision there, and you should be able to stand by that decision. We visited yesterday the speakers. We went to the National Gallery of Contemporary Art in Athens, and the curator gave us a tour. And what I found fascinating was that the work is incredibly overtly political. So they're having a year where it's only women artists that they're curating. So the work engaged with South Africa, anti-apartheid, engaged with Palestine. And then at the end we were talking about, well, where does that place you in terms of cancel culture, censorship, and so forth? And she was saying that the museum is a safe space, as she sees it, that it offers a possibility for dialogue, different visions, etc., and that's what you get. But she said if you want to protest, you need to be on the streets. And she made that distinction very definitely between the two. And I thought that was really interesting, particularly us having seen so much extraordinary political work as part of the tour.
So you're ready to go on the street?
Well, I would say we should be ready to go on the street. Yes, I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for Greece, but I think certainly in Western Europe we are incredibly, terribly passive at the moment, and you do wonder what has to happen for people to stir, and I'm as guilty of that as anyone else. But it doesn't feel like a good time in that respect. It really, really doesn't.
So you stand by the artist, and we consider cultural organization as a safe place where everybody can say whatever they feel like, and we leave all the troubles, all the issues outside the door. This is pure art we're discussing now. Nothing else, nothing more. Like we leave all the other things. Is it that again to distinguish or to take art outside the society?
Take art outside society, how do you mean specifically, Marcus? Yeah.
If we consider a museum as a safe place where we don't discuss about anything,
no,
it's just outside the door?
No, well, I mean, I wouldn't sign up for that. I do think that, well, first of all, as a curator, you have the responsibility. You defend the artist. You've chosen them. You absolutely defend them to the hilt. You explain. You give the bigger picture of where you're coming from, and it may be a genuine issue of whatever kind and be, countered and protested against. And you have to allow protest and find a way to work with that protest. I mean, very recently we were in the ULYSSES project in Derry, Northern Ireland, which, is quite a political context, of course, historically, and we opened with the First and Deputy First Ministers. There was an all-woman arts festival, and they were there, and then 3 women shot up to their feet and did a protest for Gaza. We did not know how long that would be. And the person who accompanied me says, Seán, you're the director of the festival, can you go up and see if they can, be persuaded out or removed? And I said, no, they've got the right to be in here. They're a voice as well. They speak, and it was clear that they had rehearsed it, so you kind of knew that they would get that through, and then they would leave. And there was kindness both on the stage and in the audience, and it felt good all round. They were able to protest, and the event then carried on.
Maria, I know that you had during the last documentary festival and the film festival, you had some voices and protests speaking about things that are happening now in the Middle East. How you handle these situations that were outside the normal program of the ceremony?
Ακριβώς με τον ίδιο τρόπο. Αφήσαμε να εκφραστούν.
So we did exactly the same. We let them express themselves, because festival is a space for expressing different ideas. And from the 60s, the film festival has always had the second balcony, as it's called, where we let people speak their mind. And that, I think, further strengthens the audience's trust in the festival, if you do that.
In some way, both Greece and Ireland, or many countries, they approach the situation in the same context, that they leave different voices to be heard and people to judge what they think according to their opinion. Are you optimistic about the future in the way, do you think that all the things we're discussing now, there will be like a common approach, a common thing that we don't need to discuss anymore in a year or two in a future CoMuseum conference, that we're going to find some other topics to discuss because all these things will be solved in a way and handled?
Well, no, I would offer no. It's a perpetual, eternal journey. You don't reach that kind of goal. That's not the point. You're improving and going beyond what you could possibly dream. But you're helping the future to be born. That's what you're up to. And instinctually, if you're in the arts, it's in the DNA. It ought to be. And therefore, you have to persuade where the negativities are against it somehow in your actions of programming and curating, assessing your social scene, a hierarchy of governance through to the streets, and therefore coming up with what that programme might be to trigger a way of engaging these principles. But yes, they're entirely authentic and honourable principles, and they do not necessarily need to alter or diminish the direction of artistically or the high quality.
Liam, I would like also your opinion on that, about the future.
Yeah, I think the future is by definition always changing. So where you are at a given moment, there's no sort of satisfaction of feeling you've got there. You never get there. It's always moving, and you're always reaching. But that also brings an excitement to what you're doing. And also, going back to what I said earlier, I think you're learning as a programmer, as a curator all the time, or you should be, and that's part of the excitement as well. There is that relationship. And just going back to what I was saying earlier about the gallery in Athens, there wasn't a suggestion it's either or. You go in and look at the work, or you go to the streets. It's both. The dialogue and the visions that you experience through art in the gallery is one way of engaging, but there's also the opportunity, or there should be, to protest on the streets as well. So it wasn't opposing opposites. It was that they are potentially aligned in some way.
I would like to introduce another parameter that, apart from the artistic product that an institution can produce, the educational part, I believe, is very fundamental. When you have educational programs, and it's a great thing that our festival has educational projects that are ongoing throughout the year, and these help us create active audiences. We want an audience that will go beyond words. So when we manage to work on issues of equity, diversity, inclusivity, accessibility with younger audiences, I believe we're going to create a future audience which has already been cultivated with these principles.
I wanted just, Marcus, I want to ask you, in terms of your role as marketing director, engaging with the themes we're talking about here, what are the challenges for you, within this?
I was about to ask you that from my marketing point of view, so let me rephrase, because we're talking all these interesting things. I'm going to tell you my opinion, but I would like to hear your opinion as well. Do you think that fundraising and getting sponsorship for all these things are possible sponsors ready to do that and to give money to something that it's so, not complicated, but difficult to handle? And I'm going to say what's happening in the real world.
Yep. Okay. Something difficult to handle. Do you mean classical music?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a classical music background after a folk music training, and many examples of finding ways how you convince so many, particularly younger people, to that art form. Even when I was running the Opera House in London, I invited my sister. I said I had to go between the two opera houses to see a particular conductor in the Royal Opera House. I only learned that night, after 50 years, that my sister had never been to the opera. I did not even know that in my own family. So we are very insular. We speak to ourselves in the arts. We applaud ourselves quite considerably. It's something that is right to do. You have to cohere and be cogent together. But that massive outside population is not engaging with. So with classical music, there are innovative ways that you have to somehow find to persuade those who come in, and many are doing it across the world extraordinarily. I was citing an example there that in America, in classical music, just in terms of diversity, I believe this is, my memory is true in this, that they've started interviewing rank players for the orchestra, violins through to the brass and woodwind, behind screens. They can't see them, but they can hear them. And the diversity of appointments to the orchestra absolutely shot up sharply. So that kind of underlines the natural prejudices of when you even don't think you do have them. So there's much headroom still to achieve it. And it's our responsibility, it's what we get paid to do, and it's what we signed up for. I don't think we can complain. We just have to find a solution financially and curatorially.
Liam?
I was thinking about, when Seán was talking there, I was thinking about work that we have done before. I mean, one of the advantages we have, Arts Over Borders, is that we don't have a building. In that sense, we're not an institution, but that gives you a certain flexibility. You can be potentially a bit sort of quicker on your feet in terms of what you might want to do. For 10 years, we ran a festival celebrating the life and work of Samuel Beckett, and we held it in a small town in Northern Ireland, Enniskillen. The reason we did it there was because Beckett went to school in Enniskillen. Enniskillen has one theatre, and that's it. But what has always interested us anyway is the relationship between the event and the place, how you can create something of the marriage of those two things. And so the fact that there was only one theatre meant that we could start to look and use other places that had never been found before. And what that also meant was that there were certain spaces that were particular to a particular religious tradition, and only that religious tradition went into that space. But once you open it for art, it becomes open to anyone. And there were people there who were going into buildings in their town that they hadn't been into in 50, 60 years, or they'd never been inside them. And so it wasn't just an experience of going to a reading or a piece of theatre or music. It was actually experiencing their own home in a very different way. So there are things like that you can do as well in terms of being innovative. And I think we have to do that more and more now, because the pressures financially are just becoming greater and greater.
Maria, tell us about the festival as well, who is doing an excellent job on the sponsorship thing, and how easy to find sponsors for this, and then I'm going to answer Leon's question.
Νομίζω ότι αυτή η ερώτηση αφορά τον
I think you should ask Orestis Andreadakis, our artistic director, who has managed, well, I believe that the festival has worked very hard in this respect, and thankfully through our sponsorships this year, we are completely accessible. We managed this this year for the first time. All the halls, Olympion, Zana's Green Room, the Museum of Cinema, and the Warehouse C are all fully accessible. Of course, cinema is something easy to get sponsors for because it sells, let's say. And of course, when you have Andreadakis at the helm, I think success is for sure. I don't know a lot about this personally, but I know that we've worked very hard for this.
To have Andreadakis Orestis as an innovator fundraiser, but for the other cultural organizations who are not that lucky, I can tell you that it's not easy to get funds for these kinds of things. Why? And because many companies face them too epidemic, too on the surface, they don't get deep into the trouble or into the problem, and they just want to give some money just to show off. But the other problem is that they don't get proper proposals from professionals. I mean, and this is something we discussed just before in the morning. There are not enough professionals that can go to a company and deliver something that they want to hear in the way they want to hear it. It's quite usual that artists or artistic directors consider they need to get money, they need, or they can get the money just because of the orchestra, just because of the idea. So it's a two-way problem. Both companies haven't understand the wide angle of these things we are discussing about inclusivity, diversity, and stuff like that, but they don't hear it in the way they can understand it and find why they need to invest on that and why they need to give money on that. So there is not one-way problem on that. It's always two ways to find the proper solution.
Yes, and I'm sure in different countries there are different resistances and challenges, but I find, and I'm going to give another case study because it's the best way rather than just describing the situation passively. I was appointed to run the Belfast Festival. We're talking way back in 1997, which is the biggest in Ireland multi-arts festival. And I went in with the executive director to our #1 sponsor there, that was Guinness, and they were sponsoring it for £30,000. But what they did, we went in to ask for £100,000 to see if we could lift them up to enable us to what we wanted to do. Very simply, we just packaged what was already there. Packaging and marketing is extremely knitted with artistic. I mean, I'm a believer that the #1 marketing tool is the program. You hand your marketer the gold to actually really sell something to sponsors or to new audiences and individuals. But we went in and we were at that meeting and we were successful. It was only in the relationship about a year later, I was told by the person who was acting on behalf of the corporate sponsor Guinness and saying that they went into the meeting to pull out of the festival. and therefore we would have been 30 down. But it was the selling, and it was the pitching, and it was the enthusiasm and the passion, and saying this is where we're taking it, that convinced them. So I think, like anywhere, you're pitching, and you have to pitch well to get the support somehow to whoever it is, government or, and that sounds like it's easy. It's not easy. I wholly agree with that. Yeah.
As we're trying to be on schedule for the remaining program, just to get your thoughts and your idea, from all the things we are discussing for the past few minutes and we are thinking and worrying, what is the most important thing an organization to have as a priority? Is it accessibility? It's diversity? What is the most critical thing to start off with?
Okay, I'll go first and shut up quickly. The first is quality. The best. I remember in a festival, someone said, "Seán, why are you stretching so much to get the best?" And I said, I was running a football tournament, do you want me to bring a 4th division team? That is the number one. Something we haven't touched upon very quickly is accessibility, in the sense that that's mistaken for popularism. That happens quite a lot. I.e., you give the masses fish and chips, you know, because that's what you think that they would, sorry, this is in the Anglo-Celtic world, that you would eat. So an example of, there was a festival where a top London orchestra went to play in it, and they were asked to play film music rather than Haydn, Beethoven or Wagner, because that's where the audience is. I think that is a failure of responsibility of people like in our positions. You have to trust your audience, and then you have to find a way to market them in other ways to get them in, to cross the threshold, but you give them the best and then they will trust you.
Liam?
I would probably think about the relationship between a festival and audience, and about the mutual trust that is there. But going back to what Seán was saying earlier, a festival can only be, it could be a week, whatever, and then the rest of the year it's not there. So to build up trust with an audience over, it may take a number of years before you get to that point. But that if you do manage to achieve that trust where you trust them and they trust you, you then, I think, are free to a degree in what you can do. You as a programmer know that you can take more risks because your audience will follow you, and that they will trust you, and perhaps go to events, get engaged in some way because they trust the work that you do. But it's much harder, I think, for festivals, because I think the time span is much greater. If you are a venue where you're programming right across the year, I think you've got a quicker, you can do it in a more quicker way, but wherever you are, that's absolutely crucial, I think, that relationship and maintaining that trust, and never assuming that it's a given.
Maria?
Μιλώντας για το φεστιβάλ το δικό μας πάλι.
Speaking about our festival once again, as I mentioned earlier, due to the fact that it's an annual festival, for us, let's say it's a bit easier to build these bridges of trust with the audience. Of course, nothing can be taken for granted, because if you don't listen to your audience and you don't follow developments, then suddenly this whole edifice may collapse. So what we need to do is to listen. At the festival, for example, we try to do some public surveys in order to see if we're moving in the right direction. The content, as my interlocutor said, is key, and accessibility, one doesn't exclude the other. So if you have a very fixed relationship with your audience all year round, and not only two specific events, then I think it's much easier to follow this route.
To be honest, we could continue for a longer time to discuss, but because we have to be on time, just one final thing to finish this panel. Do we create trust in society finally? I mean, is our work, our result, something that leaves a mark on the society?
It leaves a mark on at least one individual. if you run a big event and there's 30,000 people there, if there's one person whose life has altered and changed because of it, that's money well spent.
Just for one.
A torchless procession of one can change things in the future.
I mean, I would agree with that. You create the circumstance, hopefully, but what happens beyond that in terms of audience members, artists, funders, whoever it might be, you don't know what will happen, but that, I think, is part of the wonderful excitement of it, that there is surprise there all the time. But all you can do is present what you hope will be inspiring and beautiful. How people respond then is entirely up to them.
And finally, Maria.
Θα συμφωνήσω κι εγώ ότι
I would also agree. As a cultural body, we do the best we can. We offer a high-quality content, and we hope that we will be able to have the biggest possible effect on our public.
Thank you very much.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ το panel. Thank you very much to the panel. I don't know if you have any questions here within the theater for any of the panelists. Raise your hands. No questions. There were a couple of questions online. One, I believe, was kind of answered by your last round, because there was from Kidot Festival, a family festival, and they were asking, they were saying it's crucial to upgrade, and how do you achieve that? And I think for all of you, the key word is quality, and keep offering quality. And there was another question, if anybody wants to quickly answer, about whether it would be more effective if artists were included in the organization of festivals, for example. So not just managers, but as it says, dealing challenges of diversity and inclusion could be better addressed if you included artists as curators or programmers. You're sitting down again. You have a lot to say. No. So, yeah. Do you want to answer it, or you don't? No? Yes, please. Yes. Yeah.
Artists are in organizations, they are curators and should be, but quite often, quite rightly, they don't want to be in organizations that might stifle, the bureaucracy and so on. And the organization, if it's working closely enough with the artists, they are within the intimate family and circle, yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists for a very